ICF investigations. There are certain dates in history that serve as a demarcation line, a sharp blade that severs one era from another. Before this date, there is innocence, there is trust, and there is the belief that the world is a benevolent place. After this date, there is only suspicion, fear, and the locking of doors that once stood open to the summer breeze. For the nation of Australia, that date is January 26th, 1966. It was Australia Day, a national holiday synonymous with heat, beaches, and family celebrations. But in the quiet suburban sprawl of Adelaide, South Australia, the sun set on a mystery so profound and so heartbreaking that it effectively ended the nation's childhood. This is the story of Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont. 3 siblings who walked onto a crowded beach and simply vanished into the haze of a scorching summer day, leaving behind a void that has never been filled. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, we must first immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of Adelaide in the mid-1960s. This was not the bustling, cynical metropolis of the modern age. Adelaide was often described as a big country town, a place of manicured lawns, predictable routines, and an overwhelming sense of safety. It was a time when neighbors knew each other by name, when the milkman delivered bottles to the front porch, and when children roamed the streets and parks unsupervised from dawn until dusk. The concept of stranger danger did not exist in the collective vocabulary. The unimaginable was exactly that, unimaginable. The Beaumont family was the archetype of this suburban dream. Jim Beaumont was a taxi driver, a hard-working man dedicated to providing for his family. His wife, Nancy, was a devoted mother, known for her warmth and her meticulous care for her children. They lived at 109 Harding Street in Somerton Park, a respectable, quiet neighborhood not far from the coast. Their 3 children were the center of their world. Jane, the eldest at 9 years old, was responsible and mature, often tasked with looking after her younger siblings. Arnna, aged 7, was bright and spirited. Grant, the baby of the family at just 4 years old, was the shadow of his big sisters, following them everywhere with boundless energy. January 26, 1966, dawned with an intensity that promised a scorching day. The temperature was climbing rapidly, destined to reach a blistering 104 degrees Fahrenheit. It was the kind of dry, relentless Australian heat that drives the entire population toward the water. For the Beaumont children, the plan was simple and routine. They wanted to go to Glenelg Beach, a popular seaside destination just a short bus ride away. This was not an unusual request. They had made the trip before, and given Jane's reliability, Jim and Nancy felt comfortable allowing them this independence. It was a holiday after all, and the house was sweltering. The morning began with the casual rhythms of a family at ease. Jim Beaumont had left early for a shift at work, anticipating the busy holiday trade. Nancy helped the children get ready. Jane wore a pale pink one-piece swimming costume, while Arnna wore a tan one-piece. Little Grant wore green patterned swimming trunks. In a detail that would later become agonizingly significant, Jane carried a large handbag containing towels, a few articles of clothing, and their bus fare. Nancy gave them a mix of coins for the bus and for lunch, totaling 8 shillings and 6 pence. It was enough for their transport and a treat, but certainly not a fortune. At approximately 10 a.m., the 3 children walked out the front door of their home on Harding Street. They walked the short distance to the bus stop on the corner of Diagonal Road. Witnesses recall seeing them board the bus, happy and excited for their day at the beach. The journey to Glenelg took only 5 minutes. When they alighted at the beachside suburb, the clock was ticking toward a destiny that no one could foresee. By 10:15 a.m., the children had arrived at the Glenelg foreshore. The beach was already teeming with activity. Families were setting up umbrellas, teenagers were diving off the jetty, and the smell of salt water and sunscreen hung heavy in the air. The Beaumont children found a spot on the lawns of Collie Reserve, a grassy area adjacent to the sand, popular for picnics and escaping the direct glare of the sun on the water. They placed their bags down and prepared to enjoy the day. For the next few hours, the timeline is reconstructed through the fragmented memories of witnesses. Ordinary people who had no idea they were observing the final known movements of the country's most famous missing children. Between 10:30 a.m. and 11 a.m., several people saw the children playing under the sprinklers on the reserve. They were laughing, running through the water to cool off. It was a picture of pure joy. However, around 11 a.m., the dynamic changed. A witness reported seeing the 3 children in the company of a man. This man, who would become the central phantom of the investigation, was described as being in his mid-30s, with a tan complexion and thin, blonde to light brown hair that was swept back. He was wearing blue swimming trunks and lay on a towel near the children. Witnesses observed him interacting with them, not in a threatening manner, but with a familiarity that seemed odd given the parents' absence. He was seen playfully pouring water over the children, and they were seen encouraging him. To the casual observer, he might have looked like a family friend or an uncle. This interaction continued for some time. At around 12:15 p.m., a pivotal event occurred that would baffle investigators for decades. Jane, the eldest, walked away from the group and entered Wenzel's Bakery, a popular shop nearby on Mosley Street. She purchased 5 meat pasties and a meat pie. The shopkeeper knew the children well, as they were regulars. What struck the staff as unusual was not just the quantity of food, which was too much for 3 small children, but the method of payment. Jane handed over a £1 note. This detail is crucial. Nancy Beaumont was adamant that she had only given the children coins totaling 8 shillings and 6 pence. A £1 note was a significant amount of money in 1966, certainly not something a child would carry casually, and definitely not something Nancy had provided. The implication was chillingly clear. Someone else had given Jane the money. The purchase of the meat pie was also significant because the Beaumont children had never bought meat pies before. It was not part of their usual diet. This suggested the pie was for someone else, the man on the beach. Jane returned to the reserve with the food. The children and the man were last seen together shortly thereafter. At approximately 12:15 p.m. to 12:30 p.m., they packed up their belongings. A witness, a local postman who knew the children, saw them walking away from the beach. However, they were not walking toward the bus stop to go home. They were walking in the general direction of the Patawalonga boat haven, away from their house, accompanied by the blond man. The children were reportedly laughing and seemed at ease. This was the last confirmed sighting. Back at 109 Harding Street, Nancy Beaumont was waiting. The children were expected on the 12-hour p.m. bus. When it arrived and they did not disembark, she felt a flicker of annoyance, assuming they had simply lost track of time a common enough occurrence for children having fun. She waited for the 2 p.m. bus. Again, it came and went without them. Now, the annoyance began to curdle into worry. This was unlike Jane. Jane was the responsible one, the one who watched the clock. By 3 p.m., when the next bus arrived empty of her children, Nancy's worry escalated to panic. Jim Beaumont returned home from his shift around this time. Upon hearing that the children were missing, he immediately drove to Glenelg Beach. He scoured the shoreline, the reserve, and the streets, checking the spots where they usually played. He found nothing. No towels, no bags, no children. The beach was beginning to empty as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows, but his children were nowhere to be found. Jim returned home, hoping against hope that they had walked back while he was driving. They had not. At 7:30 p.m., the Beaumonts made the call that would begin the largest police investigation in South Australian history. They reported their children missing. The initial police response was swift, but it was predicated on the assumption that the children had simply wandered off or fallen asleep somewhere. Officers searched the beach throughout the night, using flashlights to check under the jetty and in the dunes. As dawn broke on January 27th, the reality of the situation set in. They were gone. The investigation that followed was unprecedented in its scale. The South Australian police mobilized every available resource. They door-knocked every house within a radius of the beach and the Beaumont home. They drained the Patawalonga boat harbor. They sifted through the sand of the beach, looking for buried evidence. Photographs of Jane, Arnna, and Grant were plastered across every newspaper and television screen in the country. The image of the three of them, Jane with her short, dark hair, Arnna with her bright smile, and Grant with his innocent gaze, became etched into the national psyche. The description of the suspect, the man in the blue swimming trunks, was circulated widely. Thousands of leads poured in. Every blond man in Adelaide seemed to fall under suspicion. Police followed up on reports of strange cars, of men acting suspiciously, of sightings in country towns hundreds of miles away. But despite the deluge of information, the core mystery remained impenetrable. Who was the man? How had he lured three well-behaved children away from a public place in broad daylight without a struggle? The theory that emerged was one of grooming. The man hadn't grabbed them. He had befriended them. He had played with them, gained their trust, perhaps bought them lunch with that £1 note. The psychological profile suggested a predator who was patient, perhaps someone who had been watching them for some time, or an opportunist who struck when he saw the vulnerability of unsupervised children. As the weeks turned into months, the desperation of the parents and the police grew. This desperation opened the door to one of the most controversial chapters in the investigation: the arrival of Gerard Croiset. Croiset was a renowned parapsychologist and psychic from the Netherlands. In a move that demonstrated the sheer helplessness of the authorities, a wealthy property tycoon brought Croiset to Australia to solve the case. Croiset's arrival caused a media circus. He walked the beach, paused dramatically, and claimed to have visions. He stated that the children had been buried in a warehouse near the children's home. He described a brick kiln and a new building. The public, desperate for answers, latched onto his words. A massive excavation was organized at the site he identified. It was a spectacle, with crowds watching as heavy machinery tore up the concrete. But as the dust settled, there was nothing. No bodies, no evidence. Just a hole in the ground and a crushed family. The failure of the psychic lead was a bitter blow, adding a layer of bizarre theatricality to a somber tragedy. While the psychic angle led to a dead end, the police continued to work on solid suspects. Over the decades, several names have risen to the top of the list, each casting a sinister shadow over the case. One of the most notorious suspects is Bevan Spencer von Einem. Von Einem is a name that induces shudders in South Australia. He was a convicted child killer responsible for the abduction and murder of a teenager in the 1980s, a series of crimes known as the family murders. Police investigators have long suspected that von Einem, who would have been a young man in 1966, could be responsible. He fit the physical description of the man on the beach: tall, blonde, and athletic. Furthermore, he was known to frequent Glenelg. Informants in prison claimed that von Einem had boasted about taking the Beaumont Children, but he has never been charged. The timeline fits, the geography fits, and the pathology fits, but concrete evidence remains elusive. Another compelling suspect is Arthur Stanley Brown. Brown was charged in the late 1990s with the murder of two sisters in Queensland in 1970, a crime with striking similarities to the Beaumont disappearance. Witnesses came forward identifying Brown as a man they had seen near the Beaumont Children at the beach. He bore a strong resemblance to the police sketches. However, Brown was an old man suffering from dementia by the time he came onto the radar for the Beaumont case, and he died before a trial could determine his guilt in the Queensland murders, let alone the Adelaide mystery. Then there is the case of Harry Phipps. This is perhaps the most disturbing and detailed lead to emerge in recent years. Phipps was a local factory owner, a wealthy man who lived near Glenelg. He was not on the police radar in 1966, but years later, his own son emerged with a harrowing story. The son claimed that on the day the children disappeared, he saw 3 children who matched the Beaumont's description in his father's backyard. He also claimed his father had asked him to dig a large hole that weekend for excavation work. The Phipps theory gained traction because of the geography. His factory and home were within walking distance of the beach. Witnesses had reported seeing the children walking in that direction. In 2013 and again in 2018, excavations were carried out at the site of Phipps's former factory. Technicians used ground-penetrating radar to look for anomalies. They found disturbed soil, but once again, no human remains. Despite the lack of bodies, many investigators believe Phipps is the most likely culprit. A predator hiding in plain sight behind a veil of wealth and respectability. We must also consider the possibility of Derek Percy, often called Australia's answer to the child killer Albert Fish. Percy was incarcerated for the murder of a child in Victoria and was a suspect in several other disappearances. He was in the region at the time, and his diary entries, though cryptic, hinted at multiple victims. Percy, however, was legally insane and non-communicative, taking his secrets to the grave. The investigation was also plagued by cruelty from the public. 2 years after the disappearance, the Beaumont parents received 2 letters. One was supposedly from Jane, saying they were being held captive but were well treated. The other was from the captor, demanding a meeting at a specific location to return the children. The parents, filled with a renewed, agonizing hope, went to the meeting spot. They waited and waited. No one came. It was later determined, through forensic fingerprint analysis conducted decades later, that the letters were a hoax written by a teenager seeking attention. It was a knife twist in an already open wound. As the years turned into decades, the case went cold, but it never left the public consciousness. Every few years, a new lead would surface. A confession on a deathbed, a new interpretation of an old photo, a bone found on a beach. Each time the police would investigate, and each time the answer was silence. The impact of the Beaumont Children's disappearance on Australian society cannot be overstated. It fundamentally changed the way parents raise their children. The era of the free-range childhood ended on that beach in 1966. Parents began driving their children to school. They stopped letting them play in the front yard unsupervised. The fear that a polite, blonde stranger could snatch 3 siblings in the middle of a crowded holiday celebration permeated the culture. It was the moment Australia lost its innocence. For Jim and Nancy Beaumont, the tragedy was a life sentence of uncertainty. They remained in their home at Harding Street for many years, refusing to move, terrified that if the children escaped or were released, they would return home and find their parents gone. They left the children's bedrooms exactly as they were on that morning in January, shrines to a frozen moment in time. The strain of the grief eventually took its toll on their marriage, and they divorced. Nancy Beaumont passed away in 2019 at the age of 92. She died never knowing what happened to her babies. Jim Beaumont, now in his 90s, still lives with the unanswered question that has haunted him for more than half a century. Today, the case remains open. The South Australian government maintains a standing reward of $1 million for information leading to the recovery of the children or the conviction of the person responsible. Cold case units continue to review the files, applying modern DNA technology to old evidence, hoping for a breakthrough. We are left with the haunting image of 3 children walking away from the ocean, towels over their shoulders, disappearing into the heat haze. They walked out of history and into legend, leaving behind a mystery that refuses to be solved. Was it the wealthy industrialist Harry Phipps? The serial predator von Einem? Or a drifter passing through who took his terrible secret to the grave? The Beaumont children would be in their 60s now. They should have had families, careers, and lives of their own. Instead, they remain forever young, frozen in the amber of 1966, reminding us of the fragility of safety and the enduring pain of the unknown. This has been a production of DCF Investigations. We delve into the shadows to bring the truth to light. The disappearance of the Beaumont children is a puzzle with missing pieces, a story without an ending. As we conclude, I want you to consider the evidence we've discussed. The £1 note, the man in the blue trunks, the sighting at the bakery. Which piece of the puzzle do you believe holds the key? Do you think the truth lies buried under the concrete of a factory? Or is it hidden in the files of a known criminal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every theory, because sometimes the answer is hiding in plain sight. Until next time, stay vigilant.